I always thought that the smell of burning was more than just the memory of a fire, something deeper, like a scar on the soul that never heals but only crusts over and the pain continues to smolder underneath. And here I am, standing on the edge of this damned peninsula in Montauk, with the ocean crashing against the rocks like it's trying to wipe away all the stupidity of man, and the air is thick with that same smell, thick and acrid and salty and damp, and I can feel it seeping into my lungs and reminding me of all the times I've dug up secrets hidden beneath layers of ash and lies. My name is Jason Reeves, and I'm an insurance investigator, one of those guys companies hire to make sure no one is trying to cheat the system out of a few million by pretending to be a victim of fate, and I'm the kind of guy who's always been there for the taking. I'm not a movie hero, not one who wears a cape and smokes in the shade, but in this business you learn to see through the smoke, to distinguish between an accident and a cunning hand that lit a match. The assignment came last night as I sat in my office in New York, staring at the computer screen where the report from the previous case flashed some fake heist in the Bronx where the owner hid his own jewels to collect the payout and the boss calls, his voice rough from too many cigarettes and too little sleep, and says, "Jason, we've got an arson in Montauk, a $2.5 million mansion owned by Alex Scholl. He's filed for restitution. Get out there and look into it. I don't like this story, it's all too smooth." I didn't argue. I packed my things: notebook, tape recorder, camera, and left at dawn, because in our business time is not just a clock, but a thread that can unravel if you don't grab it in time. And as I sped along the highway, past those endless beaches and abandoned farms, I thought about Scholl, about who he might be. A rich slacker tired of his luxury, or someone with debts hanging over his head like the sword of Damocles, and arson is the way out, quick and dirty. Montauk greeted me with typical August weather, the sky gray as an old newspaper, the wind blowing in from the ocean with a fine drizzle that doesn't so much wet you as irritate you, getting under your shirt collar and making you shiver, and the road to the mansion winds between dunes covered with coarse grass that rustles under the wheels of my old Toyota, as if whispering a warning. "Stay out of here, stranger. This is none of your business." I parked by a charred fence that had probably once been white and neat, but now stood slanted and streaked with black soot, and got out, feeling the gravel crunch under my feet, mixed with shards of glass and charred debris. The house, or what was left of it, stood on the hill like the skeleton of a gigantic beast, its walls blackened, with the brickwork showing through here and there, and the roof caved in, leaving gaping holes through which the sky could be seen. The smell of burning was stronger here, hanging in the air like a thick cloud, mingling with the scent of wet earth and salt, and I thought it was not simple arson, but something calculated, because the fire had not devoured everything to the ground. The facade was still standing, the windows were broken, but not all, and inside, apparently, there were rooms where the flames had not reached the furniture. I put on gloves, a habit I had developed over the years so as not to leave marks or get dirty in someone else's misfortune, and walked around, noting the details. The grass around the house was scorched in irregular circles, as if the fire had spread not chaotically but according to some plan, and there were no traces of the fire engines except fresh furrows in the earth. But that might have been from the rain. Too clean, I thought, too neat for a real disaster. Usually after a fire there is chaos, debris scattered, but here everything seemed to have been swept up, only soot and ash, which suggested that someone had taken the trouble to remove the evidence, or perhaps the firemen had been too efficient. But the report I had read on the way said that they arrived half an hour after the alarm was given, and the fire was already dying out of itself. I took out my camera and started shooting. Click, a wide shot from the hill, where the ocean in the background looks like a gray abyss ready to swallow all secrets. Click, close to the wall, where the soot formed strange patterns like the shadows of figures, and I found myself thinking that there was something sinister about this place, like in those old noir films where the detective is always alone against everyone else, and the wind whispers the names of traitors. As I walked around the house, I noticed a figure on the horizon, a man standing at the edge of the cliff, looking out at the ocean, his back straight, his hands in the pockets of an expensive raincoat that did not fit this landscape of destruction. It must be Alex Scholl, I thought, the owner of all this, the one who had filed for $2.5 million, and I walked towards him, stepping carefully so as not to slip on the wet grass. As I got closer, I could see him better. He was about 40, graying at the temples, his face sharp as a fox's, his eyes hidden behind dark glasses despite the overcast day, and there was something in his posture like an actor rehearsing a scene of grief, not real pain, but an imitation of it, calculated to please an audience. "Mr. Scholl," I called, and he turned slowly, as if he had known I was coming, and took off his glasses, revealing a gaze that was cold and piercing, as if he were already calculating my every move. "Yes, it's me. And you must be from the insurance company. Jason Reeves, right? I've been waiting for you." His voice was even, with a slight accent, perhaps European, and there was a weariness in it, not the weariness of losing his home, but something else, something more personal. We shook hands. His palm was dry and hard, like a man accustomed to control, and I introduced myself formally, although he already knew my name, which in itself was suspicious. Usually clients are nervous and fussy, but this one was calm, like the ocean before a storm. We walked back to the house, and as we walked, I asked the routine questions. When did the fire start? Where was he when it happened? Were there any witnesses? And he answered clearly, without hesitation. "I was in town for a meeting, came back late at night, saw smoke, called the fire department. The house was fully insured, contents included, antiques, paintings all gone." But there was something off about his words, the pauses too studied, as if he were rehearsing his speech in front of a mirror, and I made a mental note to check the alibi, because in this business an alibi is like a foundation. If it's shaky, the whole story falls apart. We came to the entrance, where the door hung on one hinge, charred and twisted, and inside I saw chaos furniture turned over, walls in soot, but again that cleanliness. No small debris, as if someone had gone over it with a broom, and the smell of burning here was mixed with something chemical, maybe an accelerant, and I thought that a lab analysis would show, but for now it was only intuition, the one that had saved me more than once. "Tell me more about the house, Mr. Scholl," I said, taking out a notebook. "What was inside valuable? And why do you think it was arson and not an accident?" He smiled at the corner of his mouth, but the smile did not reach his eyes. "Because I don't smoke, I don't leave candles on, and the security system was turned off, someone turned it off. And the valuables? A collection of paintings, Victorian furniture, but all this can be appraised, the insurance will cover it." His words sounded convincing, but there was tension in the air, like before a thunderstorm, and I felt that he was not telling me something, perhaps about debts or enemies, because such houses do not burn down without reason. There is always a motive hidden in the shadows. And then I saw her in the back of the room, by the window where the light was coming through the cracks in the wall. There was a woman standing, her back to me, in a light raincoat, her hair pulled back into a ponytail, and something in her pose, in the way she held her arms crossed over her chest, struck me like an electric shock. It was Amanda, my wife, the same one with whom we had lived for 10 years, through ups and downs, through my endless business trips and her quiet reproaches that I worked too much, was at home too little. I froze, my heart began to pound like a drum in an empty room, and the world narrowed to this figure. What was she doing here, in this charred hell, with this shawl? She turned at the sound of our footsteps, and her eyes met mine, a flicker of surprise mixed with something else, guilt or fear perhaps, but she quickly composed herself, smiling that smile I knew so well, warm, but now it seemed false, like a mask at a carnival. "Jason, what are you doing here?" Her voice was soft, but there was a note of tension in it, and I felt the ground shift from under my feet. This was not a coincidence. In our world, there are no coincidences, especially when millions are involved. Scholl was standing next to me, and his gaze slid between us, as if he knew more than he was letting on, and in that moment I knew that this was not just an arson investigation, it was something personal, something that would touch my life, like the fire had touched this house, leaving only ruins and unanswered questions. I tried to collect myself, clearing my throat to keep my voice from shaking. "Amanda, I should be the one asking what you're doing here. I'm on assignment, investigating an arson." She came closer, her heels clicking on the scorched hardwood floor, leaving tracks in the ashes, and I noticed her fiddling nervously with the ring on her finger, our wedding ring, or what was left of the symbol of our love. I'm here on business, Jason. Alex is a client of mine, helping him assess the damage to his gallery. The paintings that burned were part of a collection I was curating. Her words hung in the air, and I looked at Shawl, who nodded in confirmation. Yes, Mrs. Reeves is an art expert. I hired her a couple of weeks ago, before the fire. But there was something slippery in his tone, like oil on water, and I thought, a couple of weeks ago. Amanda didn't mention it at home. Our evenings were filled with routine dinner, TV, the occasional conversation about the weather or weekend plans, but nothing about the client in Montauk, nothing about Shoal. The smell of burning was suddenly overwhelming, choking me, and I felt a surge of jealousy mixed with suspicion. What if this wasn't just a job? What if there was something between them, and the arson was a cover for something bigger, a deception in which my wife was playing a role? I walked over to the window, looking out at the ocean, where the waves crashed against the rocks with an anger that mirrored my inner chaos, and tried to think clearly. I was an investigator. I was supposed to gather facts, not emotions, but how do you gather facts when your heart is pounding and your mind is screaming that this is all a setup? We stood there, the three of us, in that charred living room that must once have held parties with champagne and laughter, but now there was only the echo of the wind and our shadows on the walls, and I began to ask Amanda questions, trying to sound professional. Tell me about the collection. What exactly burned? Were there any rare things that might attract thieves or arsonists? She answered, listing the names of artists Monet, Picasso, but copies, of course, not originals, and her voice was even, but I knew her too well. I knew when she was nervous by the way she looked away, and now she was looking at the floor, at the ashes under her feet. Shoal intervened. I have all the documents in my office in town I can give you, but let's not do it here. The wind is blowing. Let's go to my car. It's warmer there. We got out, and as we walked, I saw him touch her arm, a light touch, supposedly to help her step over a piece of debris. But it lasted a second longer than it needed to, and it cut me like a knife, reminding me of the fights we had had, when Amanda had told me I was too suspicious, too caught up in my work, and maybe she was right. But in this business, suspicion was survival. We got into Shoal's car, a brand new Mercedes that smelled of leather and expensive cologne, and he turned on the heat, but the warmth did nothing to dispel the cold inside me. I took out my tape recorder. Tell me about that night, Mr. Shoal, in detail, every step. He began to talk the meeting in Manhattan, the dinner with the partners, the return around midnight, and Amanda sat silently, looking out the window at the ocean that now seemed to me a metaphor for our lives, calm on the surface, but full of undercurrents ready to drag us under. I took notes as he spoke, but my mind was spinning. Why was Amanda here today, just when I arrived? Coincidence? Or had she known about my assignment and come to warn him? We had been married 10 years, but the last couple had been routine, no spark, me working late, her tending to her gallery, and we rarely had heart-to-heart conversations, but I loved her, or thought I did, and now that doubt gnawed at me like a rat in the dark. Amanda, I said quietly when Shoal stepped out for a moment to answer the phone, why didn't you tell me about this client? We talk about everything. Or did? She turned to me, her eyes wet, not with tears, but with the drizzle outside. Jason, it's just work. I didn't want to bother you. You're always so busy with your investigations, your suspicions. Alex is a good man, he's in trouble, and I'm helping. But there was a crack in her words, like a charred wall, and I sensed that she was lying, or holding back, and that hurt more than the smell of burning. Shaw came back, and we continued talking, but the air in the car was heavy, thick with unsaid things, and I knew that this was only the beginning, that beneath the layer of ash lay a truth that could burn away everything I had left: my career, my wife, my faith in people. I spent another hour there, examining the remains, taking notes. Strange marks on the ground, like canisters, two symmetrical fires, and all the time Amanda was there, but like a stranger, her presence burning inside me. As I drove away, the sun was setting, painting the sky blood red, and Montauk seemed like a ghost town, where every house held a secret. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Shoal and Amanda standing by the car, close together, the wind blowing through their hair, as if tying it into a knot. This case was just beginning, but it had already changed my life, and I knew that the smoke in Montauk was not just a fire, but a signal that the fire was not yet out, and it could spread to me. Montauk saw me off with the same gray sky that had greeted me, only it seemed heavier now, as if it were weighed down by the weight of my thoughts. The ocean roared behind me like a caged animal, and I drove the winding road back to the motel, gripping the steering wheel as if it could keep my life from shattering like the glass in that burnt-out mansion. The smell of burning still clung to my clothes, soaked my hair, my skin, and I could smell it even here in the car, where the air conditioner hummed, trying to clear the damp August air. But more than the smell of burning, there was something else that choked me, the image of Amanda standing next to Shoal, their silhouettes against the sunset sky, too close, too natural, as if they belonged to each other more than she had ever belonged to me in years. I, Jason Reeves, a man who makes a living unraveling other people's deceptions, suddenly found myself trapped in my own suspicion, and it was worse than any arson, because the fire that consumes a house can be put out, but the fire in your chest, the one that flares up from doubt and jealousy, it only grows stronger with every unanswered question. The Lighthouse Motel was a typical beach house. Peeling paint, a sign flashing neon letters, half of which had long since burned out, and a damp smell in the room that greeted me like an old friend accustomed to solitude. I threw my bag on the bed, where the sheets were as gray as my thoughts, and pulled out my phone. Amanda had written a message, short as a shot. "Jason, let's talk. I'm at a cafe on Old Montauk Highway. Come over." A cafe sounded innocent, of course, but nothing about this was innocent, and I knew the conversation would not be about coffee or the weather, but about what she was doing in that house, why she hadn't told me about Shoal, and why her hand shook as she fiddled with the ring, looking into my eyes. I washed my face with cold water, hoping that it would wash away at least some of the fatigue and anger, but the mirror reflected only my wrinkles, which had deepened over the past years, and my eyes, which now showed not only the curiosity of an investigator, but also something more personal, more vulnerable, a stab of jealousy, sharp as a blade that is just beginning to cut, but already promises a deep wound. The cafe was small, with wooden tables covered with checkered tablecloths and a view of the ocean, which in the darkness was a black abyss where the lanterns reflected like stars fallen to earth. Amanda was sitting by the window, a cup of coffee in front of her, untouched, the steam rising and dissolving into the air, and she was looking at it as if the answers to all questions were there in the dark liquid. I sat down across from her, keeping my jacket on because the chill I felt was not from the weather, but from what was happening between us. "You wanted to talk, Jason, so here I am," she said without looking up, and there was something fragile in her voice, but I knew her too well. That fragility could be a mask behind which she hid the truth. "Amanda," I began, trying to keep my voice level, as if I were in an interrogation room, "you said that Shoal was your client, but you never mentioned him at home, not once in 2 weeks, and then you're here in Montauk on the day I'm coming to investigate him. Is that a coincidence?" She looked up, and there was a spark in her eyes, not anger, but something else, maybe hurt or tired. "It was a coincidence, Jason. I didn't know you'd be here. I came on business. Alex asked me to assess the damage for insurance. You know I work with galleries. That's my job." Her words sounded logical, but there was a tension in them, like a string about to snap, and I felt that stab of jealousy turn into something more, a throbbing ache that made me see the lie in every move she made. "You could have told me," I continued, leaning a little closer to see her reaction. "We're married, Amanda. We talk about work, about life, or at least we should. Why is it that the only time I find out about your client is when I see you in his burned-down house?" She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, a gesture that was so familiar. She always did that when she felt cornered. "Because you're always busy, Jason. You live for your business, your arson, your theft, your scams. When was the last time we talked about anything other than bills or what to buy for dinner? I didn't want to burden you. It's just a business trip." Business trip, the words hung in the air like smoke, which I could still taste in my throat, and I thought that in our marriage, like this case, there was too much smoke to see the truth. "So Shawl just hired you?" I asked, feeling my voice grow sharper. No calls, no meetings before. Just called and said, "Come to Montauk, appraise my burned paintings." She sighed, and there was more than annoyance in that sigh, something like regret. He contacted me through the gallery, Jason. He had a collection I was consulting on, and when the fire happened, he asked me to come over to help with the appraisal. It's not a conspiracy, it's not a drama, it's just a job. I wanted to believe her, I really did. Amanda had always been my anchor, the one who kept me afloat when the going got tough, when I'd come home from yet another case where I'd seen the worst in people, the lies, the greed, the betrayal. But when I looked at her now, I didn't see my Amanda. I saw a woman who might be hiding something, and that scared me more than any arson. I remembered Shoal touching her arm, standing there together, and the image burned into my mind like a crime scene photograph I couldn't throw away. "Okay," I said, looking away so she wouldn't see me shaking inside. "Tell me about the collection. What exactly burned? What paintings?" She started talking the Impressionist copies, the few modern Shoal had claimed to have bought at auction, but I was only half listening, my mind on something else. Why was she so calm? Why doesn't she resent my questions like she used to when I got too suspicious? And why the hell do I feel like she's protecting Shoal and not me? We sat in that cafe for almost an hour, and every answer she gave me was like walking through a minefield. It seemed safe, but one wrong move and everything would go up in smoke. I wrote down her words in my notebook, not because they were important to the case, but because they helped me hold on to maintain the appearance of control. "Are you staying in Montauk?" I asked finally, and there was more to the question than just curiosity. I wanted to know if she was coming home with me or staying here with him. "A couple of days," she said, looking into her coffee, "to finish the assessment, meet with the experts." "What about you?" I shrugged. "Until I figure out the arson. It's not just a fire, Amanda. Something doesn't add up." She nodded, but there was no support in her nod, only weariness, and I felt a wall growing between us, invisible but solid, like those charred walls in Shoal's house. Night had fallen over Montauk when we left the cafe, and the streetlights along the road cast long shadows that seemed alive, like ghosts of the past. I drove Amanda to her car, an old Volvo that she had refused to trade in despite my entreaties, and she paused before getting behind the wheel. "Jason," she said quietly, almost in a whisper, "don't make a big deal out of this. It's just a job." I nodded but didn't answer, because the words stuck in my throat like ash. She drove away, and I stood under the streetlight, watching her headlights disappear into the darkness, and the twinge of jealousy that had started in Shoal's house was now a fire I didn't know how to put out. I went back to the motel, got a bottle of whiskey from my bag, not to get drunk, but to drown out the noise in my head, and began leafing through the notes, the photographs, the reports. Shoal, Amanda, the arson, it all tied together into a knot I couldn't quite unravel, but I knew one thing. There were no accidents, especially in Montauk, where smoke hid not only the truth, but those I thought I knew best. Montauk didn't sleep that night, or maybe I couldn't sleep, lying on the hard bed of the Lighthouse Motel, the sheets smelling of damp and the wind howling outside, as if mourning all the secrets the town hid in its dunes and charred ruins. I tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling where the shadows from the flickering neon made patterns like the cracks in my own life. The thought of Amanda and Shoal, silhouetted against the sunset, talking too close in his car, burning me more than the smell of burning still clinging to my jacket. But I'm Jason Reeves, an insurance investigator, and my job is to pick through ashes, not drown in my own suspicions, so I forced myself to stand, splashed cold water on my face to clear the last of the whiskey from my head, and sat down at a small table covered with notes and photographs and reports I'd brought with me. The Shoal case smelled like more than arson, and I knew that if I didn't dig deeper, this fire would consume not just the house, but everything I had left. The morning greeted me with gray light filtering through the curtains and the sound of seagulls squawking as if they knew something I didn't. I gathered my things, a notebook, a tape recorder, a camera, a couple of vials of samples, and drove back to Shoal's mansion, determined that today I would start over as an investigator rather than a jealous husband. The road back to the house was the same. winding, gravelly, with dunes that looked like frozen waves and an ocean that roared like a warning. When I parked by the charred fence, the sun was just beginning to break through the clouds, and the light fell on the ruins, highlighting details I might have missed the day before. Black streaks of soot on the walls, strangely symmetrical, as if someone had painted them with a brush. The scorched grass, forming almost perfect circles, as if the fire had danced along a predetermined pattern, and the absence of the fine debris that usually remains after a fire. No broken dishes, no charred books, no random bits of debris that the wind has blown around the property. It was too clean, too neat, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. This house hadn't just burned, it had wanted to burn, or rather, someone had gone to great lengths to make it look burnt. I started my tour from the outside, walking slowly so as not to miss anything. My camera clicked away, capturing every angle. Here was the corner of the facade, where the brick showed through the soot like bones through skin. Here was a broken window, where the glass had shattered inward rather than outward, which was odd for a fire caused by a stray spark. Here were the marks on the ground, barely noticeable, but like the imprints of a canister, too smooth to be an accidental spill. I took out an ampoule and scraped some soot from the wall. It smelled not only of burning, but also of something chemical, sharp, like gasoline or kerosene, and I knew that the lab would confirm my suspicions, but for now it was just intuition, that itch in your chest that appears when you find a thread leading to the truth. The firefighters wrote in their report that the fire had started in the living room, but had died out on its own before reaching the second floor, which was also strange. Arson usually either burns everything to the ground or is put out, but here the fire seemed to have decided to stop, like an actor who has played his scene. I went inside, stepping carefully on the charred parquet floor, which creaked under my feet like old bones, and began to examine the living room. The furniture was overturned, but not completely burned. The pictures on the walls, or what was left of them, hung straight, as if they had been hung after the fire, to create the illusion of damage. I took a few more pictures, noting in my notebook. There are 3 fires, located symmetrically, as if they were poured according to plan. Accelerator, check the lab. As I worked, my mind wandered to Amanda. Her words in the cafe, "It's just a job," played like a broken record in my head, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. Her presence in Shoal's house, her too calm tone, her gaze that avoided mine, it all fit together, but I didn't see the whole picture yet. I knew I should focus on the case, on the facts, but the jealousy, that damned sting that had been born yesterday, was now growing like a fire, fed by every memory of her and Shoal. I remembered his hand on her shoulder, his gaze sliding over us, as if he knew more than he was letting on, and it made me clench my fists. "Pull yourself together, Jason," I muttered to myself. "You're an investigator, not a kid whose girlfriend dumped him." But easier said than done when your wife might be involved with the man whose house had burned down under such suspicious circumstances. I left the house and headed for the barn, which stood off to the side, almost untouched by the fire. The door was ajar, and inside I found something that only reinforced my suspicions. Several empty gas cans, smelling of gasoline, stood neatly in a corner, as if someone had forgotten to hide them. There was a rag soaked in something oily nearby, and I carefully wrapped it in an evidence bag, feeling my heart beat faster. This was no accident. Someone had set the house on fire and done it in a way that looked believable, but did not destroy everything so that the insurance would cover the valuable losses. I went back to the car to call the lab and arrange for samples to be analyzed, but before I could dial the number, I saw a familiar figure in the road. Shoal, in his usual raincoat, walking toward the house, and his steps were too confident for a man who had lost $2.5 million. I hid the evidence bag in the trunk and went out to meet him. "Mr. Reeves," he said, removing his glasses, his eyes as cold as the ocean behind him. "Didn't expect you so early. Anything interesting?" There was a hint of mockery in his voice, as if he knew I was digging, but was certain I wouldn't find anything. "Just doing my job," I said, trying to keep my tone equally even, scoping out the scene, collecting samples. "The fire looks unusual. Too neat." He raised an eyebrow, but didn't answer, just nodded. as if agreeing with the obvious, and that irritated me more than I expected. "Do you come here often, Mr. Scholl?" I asked, looking him in the eye. "Since the fire, I mean." He shrugged. "Sometimes. This is my home, or what's left of it. I'm trying to see what can be salvaged." His answer was logical, but there was something slippery about it, like wet sand underfoot, and I decided to press. "And your security system? You said it was disabled. Did someone know the code?" He paused, just for a second, but I saw his fingers curl into a fist. "Only I knew the code, and maybe a couple of people from the staff, but they were fired a long time ago." I wrote this down in my notebook, feeling the thread of the investigation thicken a little. We stood outside the house, the ocean wind carrying salt and cold, but the tension between us was hotter than any fire. I wanted to ask about Amanda, how they had met, why she was here, but I knew that would betray my personal motives, and Scholl, with his fox-like eyes, would notice it immediately. Instead, I changed the subject. "Tell me about the collection. The paintings, the furniture, all of it was heavily insured. Are you sure there was nothing left?" He smiled, but his smile was as cold as his eyes. "I'm not an expert, Mr. Reeves. That's what I hired your wife to do. She knows about art." The mention of Amanda hit me like a slap in the face, and I felt jealousy flare up again, but I gritted my teeth and nodded. "Yes, she knows. I'll talk to her." He nodded back as if we had made a deal and walked away, leaving me alone with the ruins and my thoughts. I went back to examining the fire, but now every step was harder. The evidence was falling into place. The canisters, the symmetrical fires, the disabled alarm, all of it pointed to an arson scheme, set for the insurance money. But Amanda, her role in this was a mystery. I remembered her words in the cafe, her attempts to explain her presence as an accident, but accidents are never as precise, as calculated as this fire. I got into my car, looking at the house that looked like a scene from a film noir. Charred walls, shadows that whispered betrayal, and me, a lone investigator searching for the truth, but afraid to find it. My phone buzzed a text from my boss. "Reeves, what's up?" Scholl called, nervous. "Dig faster." I answered briefly, "Working. Results are coming soon." But I knew the results weren't just a chemical analysis of the soot or a fire department report. These are the answers to questions I was afraid to ask. What is the connection between Amanda and Scholl? Was the fire just a scam or something more personal? And why did this house seem to want to burn, as if it knew what it was hiding? I left as the sun was setting, turning the sky the color of blood. Montauk was silent, but its silence was louder than any words, and I felt like every piece of evidence, every look from Scholl, every word from Amanda, was a piece of a puzzle that could destroy not just this case, but my life. I pulled over to the side of the road, looking out at the ocean that roared like my own mind, and I thought, if this house was going to burn down, who lit the match? And why am I afraid it might have been my wife? The lights in the motel room were as dim as my thoughts, and the lamp over the desk buzzed like a trapped insect as I went through the photographs I had taken outside Scholl's house that morning. Every detail, the symmetrical fires, the canister marks, the two clean crime scenes screamed that the fire had been no accident, but a carefully orchestrated performance, and I, Jason Reeves, a 10-year insurance investigator accustomed to cracking lies like nuts, felt like this case was slipping through my fingers like sand. But worse than that was the shadow of Amanda, my wife, hovering over the case like a ghost I could neither catch nor banish. Her words in the cafe, her calm, her evasive glances, they all crashed against me like waves on the rocks of Montauk, and I didn't know what was worse, the suspicions gnawing at me inside, or the fear that they might be true. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples, and looked at my phone. The text from the lab hadn't arrived yet, but I knew that analysis of the soot and the rag from the barn would only confirm my suspicions about the accelerant. The question wasn't whether there had been arson, but who had lit the match, and why. And why the hell was Amanda in the middle of this? The morning began with a call from the local sheriff, Tom Keller, whose voice was as rough as the gravel under my tires and just as tired. He said they had surveillance footage from a neighboring house about a half-mile from Scholl's mansion, and that I could take a look if I came down to the station. "Don't expect miracles, Reeves," he added. "The cameras are old and the quality is lousy, but maybe you'll see something." I got ready in 5 minutes, leaving my half-drunk coffee on the table, and drove to the station, which turned out to be a small building with peeling paint and a sign crookedly nailed over the entrance. Montauk was not the kind of place you'd expect a busy police force, and the station looked like it hadn't been updated since the Depression. Keller, a man in his 50s with a face as lined as an old oak tree, met me at the door with an outstretched hand as firm as his handshake. "You're the guy from the insurance company, aren't you?" he said, squinting. "Scholl's a slick guy, I can tell you that. But there's no proof yet." I nodded, not going into details, because in this case, unnecessary words are unnecessary evidence against you. We walked into a cramped room with an old computer and a monitor that seemed to date back to the days of floppy disks. Keller started the recording, and the screen lit up with a grainy image, a black and white picture taken from a camera trained on the driveway of Scholl's house. "This is all we've got," he said, sipping coffee from a mug that said, "Best Dad." The camera caught a bit of the driveway and part of the living room through the window. "Watch closely." I sat down, feeling the chair creak beneath me, and stared at the screen. The footage began the night before the fire, around 9 o'clock, according to the time code. At first, nothing, the road empty except for the wind blowing sand and the shadows of the trees moving as if alive. Then a car appeared, Scholl's familiar Mercedes, and he got out, alone, in his signature raincoat, walked up to the house, and opened the door. Nothing out of the ordinary, but I wrote down the time. 9:03 p.m. The camera switched to a view through the living room window, a blurry image, but silhouettes. Scholl came in, turned on the light, and I saw him moving around the room as if checking something. Then the light went out, and for a few minutes the screen was almost black, only a faint glow from the street lamp. And then I saw her. A woman's figure, slender and with her hair pulled back into a ponytail, came into the frame, entering the living room through the side door. She moved with confidence, as if she knew the house, and I felt my blood run cold. The way she walked, her posture, even the way she tilted her head, it was all so familiar. Amanda, my Amanda. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and tried to convince myself that this was a mistake, that the quality was too bad, that it could be anyone. But then Scholl came up to her, and they spoke, silently, just shadows on the film. But their movements spoke louder than words. He touched her shoulder, and she didn't pull away, and then they kissed. Not a quick, friendly peck, but a long, deep kiss that took my breath away. I froze, feeling the world crumble, as if someone had pulled the floor out from under me. Keller coughed behind me. "You know her?" I swallowed, trying to keep my face straight. "I'm not sure. The quality is lousy." But I knew. I knew it was her, and that moment, captured on grainy film, was like a knife stabbing me in the chest. I forced myself to watch. They pulled away, talked some more, and Amanda, if it was she, left through the same door, and Scholl stayed, watching her. Then he pulled out his phone, said something, and an hour later, around 10:30 p.m., the fire started a faint smoke, then a flash that the camera barely caught through the window. It spread quickly, but not chaotically, as if it knew where to burn and where to stop. I stopped the recording, sweat trickling down my temple, and turned to Keller. "Can I get a copy?" He nodded. "Yeah, but it's unofficial. Officially, we haven't found anything." I took the hint he didn't want to get involved until there was hard evidence, and I didn't argue. He handed me the flash drive, and I walked away, each step pounding my chest like a hammer. Back at the motel, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop and watched the footage again and again and again until every frame was seared into my memory like a hot iron. It was Amanda, there was no mistaking it, not after 10 years of marriage, not after all the nights we'd spent watching her sleep, knowing every line on her face. But now it was a stranger's face, the face of a woman who'd kissed another man hours before his house burned down. I poured myself a whiskey, but didn't drink it, just held the glass, watching the liquid tremble in my hand. Shock washed over me in waves, followed by disbelief. Maybe it wasn't her. Maybe I was going crazy, and this footage was just a trick of the shadows. And then paranoia, cold and sharp as a blade. What if she knew about the arson? What if she was helping Shoal? What if our marriage was part of this game, where I was the pawn and they were the players? I took out my notebook and started writing, trying to keep myself within the confines of the case. The facts: the fire started around 10:30 p.m. after Amanda, or a woman who looked like her, left. Shoal was in the house, but unharmed. The alarm was off. The cans were in the shed. Accelerant, probably gasoline. Insurance for $2.5 million. But the facts didn't add up because she was at the center, my wife, and I couldn't think of her as a suspect. I stood up and paced the room, trying to push the image of that kiss away, but it came back like a nightmare that wouldn't go away. I remembered the way she'd looked at me in the cafe, her words about a casual business trip, and now they sounded like a lie, as clever as the fire. I called the lab. There was still no answer, but I left a message asking for an expedited analysis. Then I dialed Amanda's number, but hung up when she didn't answer. What would I say? I saw you on tape kissing Shoal. She'll deny it, or worse, tell the truth. And then what? I went back to my laptop and pulled up the file with the fire department's report. They noted that the fire had started in the living room, but hadn't spread to the second floor, indicating it was a localized fire. That confirmed what I'd been watching. It had been a controlled fire, designed to destroy just enough to cover the fire's safety. But Amanda, her presence on the tape changed everything. If she'd been there, if she'd known what was happening, then this wasn't just arson, it was a conspiracy, and I, her husband, was at the center. My paranoia was mounting, and I began to think about things that had previously seemed impossible. What if Shoal and Amanda had known each other for a long time? What if her job at the gallery was a cover? What if our marriage, these past 10 years, had been part of some plan I hadn't seen because I'd been too busy investigating? I turned off my laptop and lay down on my bed, staring at the ceiling. The shadows from the neon continued to dance, and I thought of Montauk as a city of shadows, where the truth hid behind smoke and lies. I had to meet Amanda, ask her, but how? How do you talk to the woman you love when you see her in the arms of another? How do you remain an investigator when your heart screams that you are betrayed? I closed my eyes, but sleep did not come. Instead, images came. Amanda, Shoal, the fire that was consuming not only the house, but everything I believed in. Tomorrow, I would start digging deeper, check Shoal's alibi, talk to the neighbors, find those who knew the alarm code. But most importantly, I had to meet Amanda, look into her eyes, and see if she was lying. Because the shadows on the film do not lie, and they told a story I was not ready to hear. Morning in Montauk came with a heavy, leaden sky that seemed to press the town to the ground like a coffin lid, and I, Jason Reeves, stood at the window of my room at the Lighthouse Motel, looking out at an ocean that roared as if it wanted to tell me all its secrets, but didn't know where to begin. The smell of coffee from the cheap percolator mingled with the ever-present dampness that saturated the walls, and I could feel the weariness of the last few days settling into my bones. But it wasn't the weariness that comes from lack of sleep or long hours. It was something deeper, like my soul was wearing thin under the weight of suspicions I could neither confirm nor deny. The CCTV footage I'd watched the day before played over and over in my head. The shadows of Amanda and Shoal, their kiss, so real I could almost taste it, bitter as betrayal. I, a man who makes a living digging up truth from beneath layers of lies, found myself helpless before this truth, because it was not only about the case, but also about my heart, which, despite all the cracks in our marriage, still beat for Amanda. But now I had to face her, look her in the eyes, and figure out if she was lying or if I was the victim of my own paranoia, which, like the smoke from the Shoal fire, was clouding my judgment. I dialed her number from the window, each ring like a hammer on an anvil. She answered on the third, her voice soft but slightly husky, as if she hadn't slept or maybe been crying. "Jason, where are you?" she asked, and I felt something inside me tighten. That voice, so familiar, the same one that had whispered words of love to me all those years ago, but now there was something foreign about it, an echo from another world. "At the motel," I said, trying to keep my tone even like a detective rather than a husband whose world was falling apart. "We need to talk, Amanda. Not on the phone." "Where are you now?" She paused, and the pause was like an abyss I was afraid to look into. "I'm at a hotel on East Lake Drive. Come over in an hour. I'll be in the lobby." I agreed, although every fiber of my being screamed that this conversation would not be just a showdown, but a battle where truth and lies would collide like waves against the shore, leaving only debris. The inn on East Lake Drive was one of those places where wealthy tourists stay to feel part of Montauk without sacrificing comfort. White walls, large windows overlooking the ocean, and a lobby that smelled of freshly brewed coffee and expensive perfume. Amanda was sitting in a leather chair in the corner, a cup of tea in her hands, her light raincoat, the same one I'd seen on the tape, lying next to her like evidence she'd made no attempt to hide. She looked up as I approached, and there was something in her gaze I couldn't decipher, a mixture of guilt, weariness, and maybe fear. "Jason," she said, setting her cup on the table, "you look terrible. What happened?" It was her usual ploy to turn the conversation back to me to avoid questions, but today I wasn't going to back down. I sat down across from her, the chair creaking beneath me, and looked her straight in the eyes, the same eyes I had once called home. "I saw the footage, Amanda," I said, my voice as cold as the wind off the ocean. "The camera from the house next door. You were there, in Shoal's living room, hours before the fire. You and him. You were kissing." Her face changed, but not in the way I expected. Instead of shock or denial, she frowned, as if I'd said something absurd. "Kissing? Jason, what are you talking about? That's crazy." She leaned back, crossing her arms in a gesture that wasn't defensive but defiant, like she was throwing down a gauntlet. "I was at Shoal's house, yes, but it was a business meeting. We discussed the collection, his plans for the insurance policy. There was no kissing. You must have gotten something mixed up." Her words were confident, but I knew her too well. The slight twitch at the corner of her mouth, the way she avoided meeting my eyes for more than a second, these were the signs I'd learned to read over the years. A lie, or at least a half-truth. I pulled out my phone, opened up a frame of the footage I'd saved, and showed it to her. The image was blurry, but the woman's figure, her posture, her movements, her hair pulled back into a ponytail, was undeniably similar. "It's you, Amanda. Don't tell me it's edited. I'm not an idiot." She looked at the screen, and for a moment her mask faltered. Her eyes widened, her breathing caught, but she quickly composed herself. "Jason, it wasn't me. It must have been someone else. The quality is terrible, you can see that. It could have been the maid, or someone he knew. Do you really think that I would, that I could?" Her voice was quieter, almost pleading, and I felt the two people fighting inside me. The interrogator who could see through the lies, and the husband who wanted to believe. "Then explain," I said, leaning closer. "Why were you there at 9 o'clock at night? Why didn't you tell me you were going to Shoals? And why the hell are you sitting still when I showed you this?" Her lips pressed together, and something new flickered in her eyes, anger mixed with pain. "Because I'm tired, Jason. I'm tired of your suspicions, your interrogations. You're seeing a conspiracy in everything. I was there for work, and if you don't believe me, that's your problem, not mine." Her words hit me like a slap in the face, but I didn't back down. "My problem? Amanda, you're my wife. 10 years, and I see you on tape with another man, hours before his house burns down, and you're telling me it's a coincidence? Editing? Are you serious?" She stood up, her movements jerky, as if she wanted to run from this conversation. "I don't have to explain myself to you, Jason. You want to blame me, fine, but I'm not going to play your games." She grabbed her coat and started to leave, but I caught up with her, grabbing her arm, not hard, but enough to stop her. "Amanda," I said, my voice breaking, betraying the pain I was trying to hide, "just tell me the truth. If it wasn't you, if it was a mistake, I'll believe you. But don't lie to me." She looked at me, and there were so many emotions in her eyes that I couldn't make them all out. Guilt, fear, regret, maybe just fatigue. "I'm not lying," she said quietly, almost in a whisper. "It wasn't me. But if you don't believe me, then I don't know what to do." She pulled her hand away and walked away, leaving me standing in the middle of the lobby, where the smell of coffee and perfume was now suffocating. I walked back to the motel, feeling the cold war between us. Her words, her look, her denial, it was all like smoke, obscuring the truth, but not destroying it. I knew she was lying, or at least holding back, but I couldn't figure out why. Was she in love with Shaw? Was she part of his plan? Or had this really been a mistake, and I, blinded by jealousy, had seen things that weren't there? I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and started the recording again. Every frame was a blow. Her silhouette, his hand on her shoulder, their kiss that lasted too long to be accidental. I tried to find evidence of editing, as she'd said, inconsistencies in the shadows, oddities in the movement, but it all seemed real, too real. I wrote in my notebook, recording 9:03 p.m. woman similar to Amanda with shawl. Kiss. Fire at 10:30 p.m. check Amanda's alibi. But how do you check your own wife's alibi? How do you interrogate the person you love without destroying everything that's left between you? I decided to take my mind off the case, because if I thought about Amanda, all I could think about, I'd go crazy. I called the lab, and to my surprise, they answered. The soot had tested positive for gasoline, and the rag from the shed had been laced with the same accelerant. That confirmed arson, but didn't tell me who had done it. I called the fire inspector who was on the scene, and he confirmed my observations. The fire was neat, with pockets of heat spaced out as if someone had calculated where it would burn. "This isn't a rookie," he said over the phone, his voice weary, like someone who'd seen too many fires. "Whoever did this knew how to control a fire." I thanked him and hung up, but his words echoed in my head. Knew how to control a fire. Shoal, Amanda, or a third party I hadn't met yet. I drove back to Shoal's house, hoping to find something I'd missed. The ruins looked the same. Charred walls, the smell of burning mixed with the salt of the ocean, and a silence that felt alive, as if the house held secrets. I walked into the living room, where the tape said the kiss had taken place, and tried to picture the scene. Amanda and Shoal standing by the window, their shadows against the light, their lips melting into a moment that now tore me apart. I scanned the floor, the walls, but found nothing new, only ash and the memories of what I'd seen on the tape. Then I decided to check the second floor, which the report said had been mostly untouched by the fire. The stairs creaked under my feet, and I felt the house watching me, like an old beast that knew more than it was telling. On the second floor was a bedroom, almost untouched, with a bed covered in a gray bedspread and a closet filled with expensive suits that smelled of Shaw, his cologne, the same one I had smelled in his car. There was a box in the corner, half open, and I peered inside. Papers, bills, photographs. I started leafing through them, and my heart sank when I saw a picture. Amanda and Shaw at some kind of reception, she in an evening gown, he in a tuxedo, their smiles too close, too intimate. On the back it said, New York, June 2025, less than 2 months ago. She had said she had been working with him for a couple of weeks, but this picture told a different story. I walked back to the motel, clutching the photograph in my pocket like evidence that could either save or destroy our marriage. I didn't know what to do next, call her, break into her hotel, demand answers. But I knew that every step brought me closer to the truth I was afraid to know. The Cold War between us was growing, and I could feel it changing me. I was no longer just an investigator. I was a man losing everything he had. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling where the shadows from the neon continued to dance, and I thought that Montauk was more than just a place. It was a labyrinth where truth and lies intertwined like threads in a spider's web. Amanda claimed the tape was an illusion, but her eyes said more than words, and I knew I had to keep digging, even if it meant destroying everything I loved. You know, sometimes in life you're sitting in this goddamn motel with the paper-thin walls, and you can hear someone coughing or mumbling in their sleep behind them, and you're staring at your laptop screen with reports and photos blinking by, and suddenly you realize that this whole thing, this arson in Montauk, that started out as a routine insurance fraud check, is now growing like a spider's web, entangling not just Shoal, but you, your wife, your memories, and you're forced to dig deeper into this man's past. because your gut, that damn thing that saved me so many times in my investigations, is telling you that Alex Scholl isn't just a rich mansion owner, he's someone with a shadow behind him, a history full of dark corners where secrets are hidden that could burn down not just one house, but entire lives. I, Jason Reeves, sat there in the room at the Lighthouse Motel, the lamp over the table casting a yellow light like old newspaper, and the air thick with the salt of the ocean seeping through the cracks in the windows, and I decided that I couldn't rely on the evidence from the fire scene or on the grainy CCTV footage that had plagued me at night, showing Amanda in Scholl's arms, and I had to dive into his past, because in this business, in this world of insurance scams and hidden motives, the past always leaves a trace, like ashes after a fire, and if Scholl had set his house on fire, it might not be the first time he'd played with flames, metaphorically or literally. I opened my laptop and connected to the databases I had access to through the company, not the public ones that anyone could poke around in, but the ones that required a password and connections, gleaned from military records and police reports and even Interpol reports, because Scholl, with his European accent and cold eyes, was clearly not your typical American rich guy, and I started simple. I typed in his name, Alex Scholl, and the date of birth I'd pulled from his life insurance policy, and the screen filled with lines that at first seemed as disjointed as debris from an explosion, but gradually came together to form a picture so dark that I felt a chill down my spine despite the muggy August air of Montauk. The basic facts came out first, the ones that lay on the surface like the top layer of ash. Alex Scholl, born in 1980 in a small town on the border of Germany and France, of Alsatian descent, which explained his accent, a mix of German precision and French sophistication, and he moved to the States in the late 90s, ostensibly to study, but records showed that right after college he enlisted in the army, not the regular troops, but straight into the special forces, and here was where things got interesting, because his service wasn't the kind you see in parades or in Hollywood movies with heroic soundtracks, but a dark, classified one with operations in hot spots where there were officially no American troops. And as I looked through these records, I felt the puzzle starting to come together, because Scholl served in an elite unit similar to those who do black operations. The kind where the goal is not to capture flag and erase the traces, and his dossier was full of gaps, those damned classified and access limited. But even what leaked out was enough to understand. This guy is no newbie in the matter of manipulating reality. I dug deeper, reaching out through old channels to one of my contacts in the veterans databases, an ex-cop named Mark who was now retired in Florida and would occasionally help with such requests in exchange for a bottle of good whiskey, and he sent me a file, an off-the-record one, pieced together from rumors and scrappy reports, and it listed Scholl as the commander of a small team in Afghanistan in the early 2000s where they had been running special operations to take out high-profile targets. But one of them had gone awry, a dark episode that was never officially discussed, but was whispered about. Scholl's unit had been ambushed, lost 2 people, and then supposedly got revenge by wiping out an entire village. And although there had been no investigation or it had been classified, fellow soldiers who might have testified had disappeared, one supposedly killed in a car accident, another missing in action in Iraq, and a third who had simply faded into the shadows, changing his name and disappearing from the radar. And I, reading it, I thought that Scholl, with his calm gaze and measured pauses in conversation, was used to playing with people's lives, like a chess player with pieces on a board, sacrificing pawns for the sake of the king, and that king is himself. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes because the screen was starting to blur with fatigue and the ocean outside the window was roaring, as if encouraging me or warning me that I was wading into dangerous waters, but I couldn't stop myself. This had become personal since Amanda had entered the picture, and her denial in the hotel lobby, her look of something I couldn't name, only spurred me on, because if Scholl was manipulating his co-workers into disappearing, then he couldn't possibly be manipulating my wife into playing a game of arson and $2.5 million in insurance. I decided to leave the motel because the walls were closing in, and I drove to the local library, the one on Montauk's Main Street, where dusty shelves of war and history books stood in the dim light, and there I found some old newspaper clippings, digitized but still smelling of time, and one of them, from 2005, mentioned an incident in Afghanistan where an American unit led by Captain Az, who might have been Shoal, was accused of abuse of power. But the case was dropped, and the witnesses, locals, suddenly recanted, and one of them disappeared, just vanished into the mountains. And I thought that this was a pattern, a recurring motif in Shoal's life. The people around him disappearing when they became inconvenient, and this sense that he was playing with lives, like a puppeteer pulling strings, became so strong that I felt a feeling of nausea mixed with anger, because if he was playing with the lives of his fellow soldiers, then perhaps he is now playing with mine, drawing Amanda into his web. I went back to the motel, but not to rest. I called another contact, a former military analyst named Sarah, who I knew from another case where I'd investigated fake veterans' claims, and she, her voice raspy from too many cigarettes, told me more. Shoal had served in special operations in Iraq and Syria, where his unit specialized in shadow missions, the ones where officially nothing happened, but then bodies would turn up in the desert, and one episode had been particularly dark, an operation to capture an insurgent leader that ended with the entire unit, except Shoal, wiped out, but the report said an accidental explosion, and the rumors were that Shoal had staged it himself to cover up a failure, or, worse, to eliminate witnesses to a weapons theft or something worse, and the fellow soldiers who had survived other missions had disappeared one by one drowned in a river, another had gone missing while on vacation in Europe, another had simply never returned from a deployment, and Sarah whispered to me over the phone, "This guy Shaw, he's like a ghost, he only leaves traces in the shadows, and if you dig too deep, be careful, because guys like him don't like having their past dug up." Her words echoed in my head as I paced the room, and I thought about Amanda, about her role in this, about how she could have gotten caught up in the web of this man who was used to playing with lives, and jealousy, mixed with fear for her, burned inside me like the fire in that mansion. To confirm, I dug into the online archives, those accessible through veterans forums and unofficial databases, and found references to Shoal in posts from former service members, anonymous of course, because the fear of his kind never goes away with retirement. One post spoke of Captain Shoal, who sold his soul to the devil in the desert, and his crew paid for it. Another of a missing comrade who knew too much about dark deals during operations, and it all added up to a portrait of a man for whom life is a game in which he writes the rules, and the losers simply disappear like smoke in the Montauk wind. I sat there, rubbing my temples, and the ocean outside the windows seemed like a metaphor. The waves rolling in, washing away the tracks, but the skeletons remaining under the water, and Shoal was the one who drowned his own to rise. And now, with this arson, he was probably drowning me, using Amanda as bait or a pawn, and this sense that he was used to playing with people's lives became so tangible that I felt the air in the room thicken, and I had to go outside, into the rain that had come suddenly, like the tears of the sky over this damned peninsula. I walked along the beach, where the sand was wet and heavy, and the waves crashed against the rocks with a fury that mirrored my inner storm, and I thought about Shoal, about his service, about those dark moments where he must have given orders that could have saved lives and never blinked when his comrades disappeared, making him the perfect candidate for an arson scam, a man who calculated every move like a special ops operation where fire was a weapon and insurance was a prize. I went back to the motel, wet and cold, but with a clear head. Tomorrow I would contact Shoal, ask questions about his past, see how he reacted, because in this business, reactions are half the truth, and if he was playing with lives, it might be my turn to turn the board over. Picture me, Jason Reeves, sitting in this stuffy motel room called the Lighthouse, with the lamp on the table flickering like it was trying to convey some kind of warning to me in Morse code, and outside the window the ocean at Montauk crashing against the shore with such fury as if it knew all my secrets and was mocking me, and suddenly it dawns on me, like a bolt of lightning on a clear day, that this case, this arson at Shoal's mansion, which began as a routine check for insurance fraud, is no longer just a job, but has turned into a trap in which I myself am the prey, because every lead I pull, every fact I dig up about Shoal's past with his dark special operations and his missing co-workers leads not only to how he might have set fire to his house to make 2.5 million, but straight to my own family, to Amanda, my wife, who suddenly finds herself in the center of this vortex, like a key witness, maybe even an accomplice, and that thought burns me inside more than the smell of burning from those ruins, because I love her, damn it, despite all our quarrels and cold nights when we lie back to back like strangers. But now I see how entangled she is in this web, and the question is not whether Shoal set the house on fire, but why all roads lead to her, and who set this trap into which I stepped without noticing. It all started that rainy morning when I woke up to a knock on the door, not loud but insistent, as if someone knew I was there and wanted me to open it. And I, still half asleep and full of the shadows of Shoal and Amanda, went to the door in my shirt sleeves, feeling the cold air coming through the cracks, and there stood the delivery guy, a guy in a yellow jacket wet from the rain, holding an envelope, and he said, "For Mr. Reeves, Anonymous," and walked away without waiting for a tip. And I closed the door, feeling my heart pounding, because in our business, anonymous messages are not romantic. They are a signal that someone knows more than you and is playing cat and mouse with you. I tore open the envelope, and inside was a flash drive, plain and unmarked, and a stack of papers as yellowed as old newspapers, and when I inserted the drive into my laptop, the screen filled with files, transcripts, photos, documents, and they all revolved around Shoal, but with a twist that hit me in the gut, because there was Amanda, my Amanda, in correspondence with him, dated months before she had spoken, and in those messages there were not just business-like discussions of the art collection, but something personal, hints of meetings, of secrets we keep. And I felt the world closing in, like the walls of the motel were closing in, and I was becoming the object of this game where Shoal, with his military background, where he had manipulated the lives of his fellow soldiers, was now manipulating me, using my wife as bait or as a weapon. I leafed through those papers, my fingers shaking, and there were Shoal's bank statements showing transfers to Amanda's gallery account, amounts that didn't fit with a normal art consultancy, but rather smelled like money laundering or bribery, and suddenly all the threads of the investigation I'd been following, from his special operations in Afghanistan, where he might have set off accidental explosions to eliminate witnesses, to this arson, where the fire was too neat to be accidental, now led back to my family, to our house in New York, where Amanda and I had lived for the last 10 years, fighting over my business trips and her late nights at the gallery. And I thought that maybe those fights weren't just fatigue, but part of a plan in which she might have become an accomplice, helping Shoal value the burned paintings that, who knows, might not have burned but were hidden somewhere. And this thought that my wife was a key witness, if not a participant, tore me apart, because I saw her eyes in that lobby when she denied everything. And now I understand that there was not just fear in them, but the knowledge that the trap was slamming shut, and I was in it. I couldn't sit still, that room with its flickering lamp and the smell of dampness was suffocating me, so I grabbed my jacket, wet from yesterday's rain, and drove to Shoal's house, but not straight ahead, but a roundabout way through the dunes, where the wind whistled in my ears like the whisper of traitors, and I stopped on the side of the road, looking at the ocean that seemed endless like my doubts, and I thought that this was not just an investigation, but a game where Shoal was the master and I was a pawn, and he, with his experience in black operations where people disappeared without a trace, had now set a trap where all the evidence, from the canisters in the barn to the recording of the kiss, led to me, making me doubt my own wife. And maybe the goal was not insurance, but something more, connected with my family, because in those documents from the flash drive, there was an extract about my father, an old policeman who had been investigating Shoal's case for years back, some old scam, and suddenly it all clicked into place. This was revenge or a cover-up, and Amanda, my Amanda, was caught in the middle, perhaps not by choice, but now she was a witness who knew too much, or an accomplice who had chosen a side. I drove to the ruins, where the smell of burning still hung in the air, mixed with salt and rain, and I walked through the house, stepping carefully on the scorched parquet that creaked as if complaining about my persistence, and fragments were spinning in my head. Shoal in Afghanistan, giving orders on which lives depended, and now here in Montauk he was giving orders to Amanda, maybe blackmailing her with something from our past, or tempting her with promises of a new life. And I found in the bedroom, in that box I'd looked through earlier, another photograph of Amanda and Shoal standing outside our house in New York, and the date was a week before the fire, and it was like a punch in the solar plexus, because all the threads led to my family, to our marriage, which might have been part of this trap, and I felt like I was becoming an object in a game where my every move was predicted, and Shoal, with his cold gaze, waiting for me to make a mistake. I went back to the motel, but on the way I noticed a car following me, a black sedan with tinted windows, and when I turned, she turned, and it wasn't paranoia, it was reality, because in this case, with Shoal and his past of co-workers disappearing, now I felt like I was next, and Amanda, my wife, the key witness, was calling me at that moment, her voice on the phone shaking like a leaf in the wind. "Jason, we need to meet. I have to tell you everything." And I agreed, but inside I knew that this could be part of a trap, where she might be an accomplice, luring me deeper into this game, and the ocean roared outside the window, as if applauding this turn. And I thought that Montauk was not just a place, but a stage where a drama was being played out, and I, the investigator, was now the main victim. I arrived early, half an hour early, as I always do when I sense a trap. The lobby of the hotel on East Lake Drive smelled of the wet wool of expensive carpets and coffee brewed for show. The glass of the panoramic windows gave away the ocean in full view. Leaden, heavy, without promises. I sat down in a chair with my back to the wall, facing the entrance and the stairs. On my knees was a folder with printouts, a photo from a June reception, a couple of screenshots of correspondence from a flash drive, a statement on a transfer to her gallery. The paper rustled like dry grass. If I scratched it, it would burst into flames. She was 15 minutes late. Her steps were the same, confident, slightly hurried, as if she was always half a step ahead of the conversation. A light coat, her hair pulled back, a look that used to be concerned about whether I was frozen in the winter, now a smooth mirror surface. She looked at me as if I were a stranger who needed to be explained the rules. "Jason," she said calmly, "I thought you weren't coming." I nodded toward the chair opposite. She sat down, placed her bag next to her, with the flap facing me, a detail that only those who fear nothing, or those who are sure that you have already lost, give out. "Let's skip the coffee," I said. "Let's get down to business." She smiled faintly, a silent laugh. "To which one?" I put a photograph in front of her. "June, New York. She is in a dress, Shoal in a tuxedo. Nothing between them. Only this nothing was closer than our last 2 years. You said, a couple of weeks. The picture shows 2 months ago. She didn't even blink. Invitations to receptions are sent out in advance," she said, as if explaining to a child why the stove must not be touched. "I work with several collectors. Alex was one of them." I attached a screenshot. Tickets for better via Reykjavik, fewer questions. Same code. Her answer, "Only after an advance. I don't want to risk it." "Dates before the fire." "Reykjavik?" I asked. "I thought you didn't like the cold." "This isn't my correspondence," she said evenly. "You said it yourself. The quality is lousy. The quality of your sources, Jason." There was no hint of a catch in that sentence. Only cold attention to every word. Someone else in her place would have screamed, grabbed the sheets, torn them. She didn't. She assessed them, weighed them, and put them on the edge of the table like an unsuitable frame for a painting. "Okay," I put it further. "An extract, money from Shoal's funds to her gallery account. The amounts are too neat for consultations. Is this also lousy quality?" "It's a job," she said. "I sold him services. He paid. We're adults, Jason." I leaned forward. "Grown-ups don't kiss 2 hours before a fire that costs $2.5 million. Grown-ups don't turn off alarms. Grown-ups don't write after the advance, and they don't buy tickets for two." She looked at me calmly, like a surgeon looking at a picture of someone else's rib. "You want me to say, yes, it happened. Then what? You're going to call fraud? Send me to jail? Send yourself along with me? Because you're already in this, Jason. You took the tape without a warrant. You went into the fire scene without an escort. You're going through private messages. The shoulders shrugged slightly. You're doing it all wrong, as always when it comes to us. The word us fell between us like an empty glass, without a ringing sound, but with a clear indication of the border. Where were you yesterday after the meeting in the lobby? I asked. In the room. I was counting the assessment sheets. Great, I leaned back. Then you won't mind if I ask the concierge to confirm. She didn't go out, no one came in. She smiled for real now, just a little bit. Ask. You'll like the answer. I stood up. Not to go to the counter, but to feel that familiar cold wind I call work rising inside me. It fanned the flames of jealousy, but kept them from burning the core. I looked at her bag. She understood the look. It's not funny, Jason, she said quietly. We're not at the police station, and we're not in our house. Sit down. I sat up. For the first time in days, I felt truly afraid, not for myself, but for what was about to happen to that image of Amanda I still held in my arms like a fragile thing. She turned her head toward the window, as if trying the phrase on the horizon, and said, I'm tired of living inside your work. I'm tired of being evidence that you constantly check for authenticity. I'm not your thing, Jason, and I'm not your case. Then tell the truth, I said. Just tell it. She returned my gaze. It did not have the soft depth I was used to. It was flat, icy water. I was reflected in it, alien, gray. The truth is, you're late. That's all. She stood up, bag on her shoulder, coat on her elbow. I didn't move. I only noticed one small thing. The key card peeked out of the pocket of her coat and hid again. She leaned towards me, so close that I could smell her shampoo, the same one that smelled like our Sunday mornings, and whispered, Don't do anything stupid. This is not a game where the good ones win. She left. I sat for another minute, then stood up. The concierge desk was occupied by the empty gaze of a man who had long ago learned not to remember faces. I asked politely. He answered professionally and evasively. The cameras in the hallway don't record, and guests value privacy. Of course. 10 minutes later, I had a duplicate of her card. Not because I'm a hacker god, but because in Montauk hotels, people believe that the biggest danger comes from the ocean, not the lobby. The room was quiet and cold. The curtains were not fully drawn. The same ocean, only closer. On the table was a laptop with a screen off. Next to it was a folder with evaluation forms, a ruler, and a calculator. Everything was very neat. I put on gloves. Habit. I opened the nightstand. Inside was a Bible, an empty phone box, and a thin black smartphone with no logos. Probably the temporary one. He asked for the code. I'm not a spy movie hero. I don't guess codes the first time. But there was a business card holder nearby. Thin leather with an elastic band. Inside were gallery cards, a couple of dry notes, and a sticker. 0412. 4 numbers that are most often chosen by people who have no more strength to compose. The screen came to life. A messenger with no name. A chat under the nickname A. The last messages were 3 days ago. A. How is the shore? A. Don't delay. The window is short. A. Money on the way. Boat at 4:30. Then it's me. Before that, a long thread. I didn't bother to scroll through the old photos. I was already elbow-deep in mud. I scrolled down to the attached documents. Draft letters from an insurance lawyer with precise wording, damage assessment, loss of unique property, special conditions. A request for an advance payment, the kind you can get if you cry enough and breathe into the phone correctly. A file with 2 tickets JFK Keflavik Zurich, due in 3 days. The names changed, but the familiar structure of the letters is visible. My palms are sweaty inside my gloves. In the closet is a suitcase, prepared as if for a short business trip. A minimum of things, a maximum of empty space. On the shelf is an envelope made of thick paper. Inside are 2 passports. Real, but the names are not theirs. The photographs do not argue. I photographed everything. Every page, every barcode, every date. The phone went back into the nightstand, the passports went back into the envelope. The key card, a crumpled copy of me, went into my pocket. I left the number exactly as I found it. Even the blanket on the back of the chair was pulled out exactly as it was. When I took hold of the door handle, the lock itself hummed. On the other side, the key clicked. I managed to take a step back. The door opened. She came in, unsurprised. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw her for real. Without soft corners, without the usual warmth. The mask burned, not broken, but burned, leaving clean, sharp lines. "Quickly," she said. "I thought you'd take longer." "I didn't want to dig," I said. "I wanted to hear." "I heard," she nodded at the nightstand. "Is that enough?" "Enough to know you were lying to me. Enough to stop you." She walked past, put her bag on the table, took off her coat, hung it carefully. Each movement was like a line in a blueprint, without excess. She opened the window. The damp air with salt hit her face and ran a cold finger along her neck. "You won't stop anyone," she said. "Not because you're weak. You're stubborn. But there's no winning here, only scorched earth." She stepped closer. "Look at me, Jason, and stop looking for the one you lost." I looked, and I saw the woman I loved and the woman I didn't know. They stood in one body and no longer argued about who was the boss. The boss was the one who chose. "Why?" I asked. "Why him? Why this?" "Because it's easier," she said. "Because you always chose someone else's fire, not our home. Because at some point I realized I need a matchbox too, and someone who isn't afraid of fire." "He's using you," I said. "He's using everyone. You're his conduit, his access icon to money. You're another resource." "And you're just another judge," she snapped. "I'm tired of living under a sentence." She walked to the nightstand, opened it, took out a black phone, and placed it on the table. The gesture was half invitation, half challenge. "Take it. Take it to the sheriff. Take it to your boss. Make a copy. Do what you can." She looked straight ahead without smiling. "But remember, they're not coming after me because I'm a good girl or a bad girl. They're coming because I have something they want, and you have a piece of it now, too. Take care of it." "They?" I asked. "Are they still his they from the service, Amanda, or are they yours now?" "It doesn't matter," she said. "Words don't change anything. Only time and distance." "How much time do you have?" I asked. "How long until the boat?" She shook her head slightly. "You'll come anyway. You're like that. When you see water, you want to know how cold it is." I came closer. I could grab her wrists, press her against the wall, and drag out every word. But then we would leave this room as different people. The boundary I still hoped to preserve would disappear completely. "The kiss in the living room," I said. "It happened. Stop saying it didn't." She didn't look away. "It was," she said quietly, "because I wanted you to finally watch. I knew you were somewhere nearby. I knew you'd get the tape. You always get the tapes. You live by them." A seagull called out from outside. The sky was as low as the ceiling. I felt something inside click, not break, no, just fall into place. Not the place I wanted, but the place we had. "You could have just said," I said, "that you were leaving." "And would you let him go?" She raised an eyebrow. "You love laws, and yourself in the laws. Would you write the protocol of our divorce?" "You see, Jason," her voice became softer, which hurt more. "Sometimes one spark is enough. You taught me that yourself." She took the phone, put it in her bag, and turned to the door. "Don't go to Shoal today. Don't go to the station. Stay out of the water. That's my advice." "Advice from your wife?" I asked. "Advice from a man who still remembers how you hold a cup with your left hand when you're tired." She left. I remained standing, listening to the corridor grow quiet. On the table was the edge of the envelope, which I had carelessly moved when I was looking at the passports. I straightened it, sat up, and rested my forehead in my palms. Everything inside burned evenly without flashes. A fire that does not warm dries. A minute later, I got ready. I didn't take the phone with her correspondence. I only took the pictures I had taken and the printouts from my folder. That's enough to make any investigator run in circles like a dog on a scent. That's not enough to put someone away, but it's enough to understand where the waves are hitting. The same black car was waiting for me at the exit of the hotel. Tinted windows, the engine running quietly, like someone else's thought. I stopped on the step and met the dark rectangle of a gaze. The car moved slightly, then froze. We understood each other. It was not time yet. I got into my Toyota and drove to the ocean. Not because I like dramatic panoramas, but because the wind there is so strong that it blows unnecessary words out of your head. The cliff is empty. The foam is white below. The time code on my phone. Boat at 4:30. I have the night and a choice. Call the sheriff now and burn Amanda, perhaps forever. Or go to Shoal and burn myself. Or wait, see who comes to the water. Sometimes the truth itself comes ashore, like a discarded net. I stayed until dark. The ocean breathed steadily, like a sleeping animal. Heavy clouds hung in the sky, ready to rush toward the earth. When the rare lights along the highway came on, I realized that the masks had indeed burned, and in a strange way that made it easier. I could finally see her eyes without the glass between us. Cold? Yes. Alien? Perhaps. But real. I returned to the motel after midnight. The room greeted me with the usual dampness and hum of the lamp. I laid out the photographs on the table. Tickets, passports, correspondence, the lawyer's drafts. I marked each one with a pencil. Time, place, source. Not for the court, for myself, so as not to forget what really happened when new smoke screens begin. The phone lit up. Not a number, but a message. No signature, no embellishment. When you arrive, stand above the lighthouse. Don't be late, and not alone. I smiled, not feeling my lips. Not alone, that means they are waiting for me, or checking me. And where the mayak shines, the water is the darkest. I turned off the lamp and lay down without undressing. Sleep came short and ragged, not with pictures, with noises. The whisper of rain on the tin edge of the air conditioner. The smooth running of someone else's motor under the window. The beating of my own heart, too loud for this thin room. At 4 I got up. The water in the sink was ice cold. Good. Ice burns worse than fire. There was one sheet of paper left on the table, a photograph from the reception. I put it in my pocket, not as evidence, as a reminder how easily a smile becomes a mask and how quickly masks burn out. By 4:30, night was still hanging over the lighthouse. The wind licked the ledges, the lighthouse tower blinked a sleepy eye, the sea breathed below, heavily and indifferently. I stood above the lighthouse, as it was in the text message, and felt the salty dampness creeping under my jacket. In my pocket was a key card to her room and a flash drive with copies. On the phone was a scheduled letter to the boss. All the photos, time codes, statements, passports. If something happened to me, the letter would go at 5 o'clock. Not alone, that meant my copies and time were with me. I had no others. The headlights emerged from the darkness without a sound, like the eyes of an animal. That same black sedan stopped 20 steps away. To the left, another car pulled up to the edge, a rental SUV. The doors opened almost synchronously. Alex, still in the same coat, collar up, face clean, cold. Next to him, a stocky man with arms hanging like weights. Amanda came out last. Without a coat, in a sweater, hair smoothly pulled back. She looked as if we were meeting in the office to sign papers. Punctual, said Shoal. The word bounced off the stone like a coin. You like graphs, I replied. So do I. He smiled with the corner of his mouth. Unusual. A smile without warmth. Jason, Amanda said quietly, you didn't have to come. You called me yourself. I warned you. Shoal looked around the edge of the cliff, the lighthouse, and me, as if checking the perimeter. Let's be brief. You have my insides, I have your silence. We are all adults. It's only a question of price. The price is what you already stated in the application, I said, 2.5 million. Price is not a sum, Amanda interrupted softly. Price is who pays with what. Money, time, freedom, or something even more valuable? I pointed to the sedan. Is it cash or just muscle? Plotny didn't blink. Shaul spread his hands. Why be rude? I have a proposal. You give us everything you've dug up. We'll finish what we started. You disappear from this story with money for silence. Period. How many? The question hung in the salt. Amanda turned her gaze to the sea. Shoal nodded slightly to the stocky one. He opened the trunk. A bag, unusually small, but heavy in appearance. 50 now, Alex said. The rest when we're done. The rest is how much? I asked. Enough, he smiled again, to stop working for people who pay you crumbs and make you dig in other people's ashes. This is all I can do. You can see, he said, I need people like that. Amanda was silent. She wasn't looking at me, but slightly to the side, as if she were listening to another sea. I took a folded photo from my inside pocket tickets. I put it on the hood of the sedan. The paper rustled. JFK, Keflavik, Zurich, 2 seats. Today is -3 days. Do you seriously think you'll leave quietly? We know how quietly they leave, said Scholl, and how quietly those who interfere disappear. His voice didn't change, but it became colder. I took a breath, exhaled. The words came out of my chest smoothly. I have a timer for writing. At 5 in the morning, my boss gets everything. To drop it is one gesture. To cancel is also one gesture. And also, a copy is with a person you do not know. You are not erasing me, Alex. Not tonight. Blackmail for blackmail, he nodded, even as if approvingly. Finally, we speak the same language. Amanda turned her head towards me. Say what you want, Jason. Clearly, no scenes. I looked into her face. I didn't look for the old one, she was gone. The one who makes a choice and carries it without blinking remains. I want you to confess, I said, to withdraw your statement, to sit down and give the money to those who saved your house and who shouldn't have. I want you to tell the truth, at least to me, to just one person. She smiled, tiredly. You want the impossible. You always wanted to. Then why did you call? I asked. So that you can see, she said simply, what you've run into and who's on the other side, so that you have a chance to get out, together or separately, but get out. Shaw pushed himself away from the car and took a step towards me. So, 50 now. The rest when the wallets from your office get another letter, that the fire is not enough to pay. We will close the case carefully. You will not be in the report. What if I say no? Then you'll spend months in court. You'll lose your job, your life, and you'll still end up with nothing. Because people like you always end up with nothing, Jason. It's a question of cost, and you don't like to count it. I can count, I said. It's just that sometimes the numbers don't add up. At that moment, the wind brought the sound of a motor from the water. The light boat moved without lights along the notch of rocks. Time flowed down my throat like ice water. 4:29. I looked at Amanda. She caught my gaze, pushed a strand of hair behind her ear, as she had done thousands of times at home. So what? She asked quietly. No? I took out my phone. The lock panel was dumbly glowing. A big red cross, cancel, on the mailing. A big green, send now. Funny, 2 buttons, and between them life. If you cancel, come with us, Scholl said, almost affectionately. It's more honest than playing night among officials. I like people who make decisions on time. I tapped the screen. Once. The phone beeped briefly. The green button dimmed. To them, that could mean anything. To me, that letter had gone early. Amanda froze for a split second. That split second was enough. You chose, she said. I chose myself, I answered. And you, the real you, the one who will tell the truth at least once. She nodded, strangely calm. Then listen, this wasn't about money. Money is a tool. This is about freedom from you, Jason. From your control, your protocols, your shoulders. Alex provides the release. You don't. She stepped closer. And I'm coming. The boat's motor became louder. Something blue flashed on the road, where the lighthouse cast a light on the turn. Or did I imagine it? Tightly closed the trunk. Shoal took a step back, as if preparing for the start. Amanda looked down at the water, and for a second her eyes were the same warm and scary. "Don't be a hero," she said. "Don't interfere." "It's late," I said. She didn't ask why. She understood. The dense one moved towards me calmly, without a jerk. I raised my free hand, showing an empty palm. "No need," I said. "There will be noise from now on." From above, from the highway, a howl did indeed cut through. Not loud, but steady, confident. Not just one. A second. A third. Shaul looked up, his eyelashes fluttering. For the first time that night, he had lost his tempo. "In the car," he said. Amanda stayed where she was. We were standing almost next to each other, so close that I could feel the warmth of her shoulder. She looked straight at me. "The last time," she said. "Are you sure?" I wanted to say no, to tell her to run, to say I'm tired too, but the words stuck. The air smelled of sea and iron. I nodded. "Sure." She smiled the way she used to smile in the days when we were still us. "Cold." She stepped back, sharply, and disappeared into the darkness, not toward the sedan, not toward the road. Toward a low path that dipped toward a small concrete patch under a cliff I'd seen it that morning when I'd been looking at the shore. A second way out. She always had a second way out. The blue light fell on the slope, swaying. The dense one covered Alex with its body. The sedan scraped its tires, turned almost on the spot, and went into the darkness. I didn't move. I'm not a policeman. My job is different. The boat stopped on the water for a short run. The engine dropped, then picked up again. I went down a step to the edge and saw a shadow in a sweater jump on board. The black back of the boat jerked towards the bay. Blue light darted after, blocking the sea with a jagged strip, but immediately drowned in the fog. The Price issue hasn't gone away. He's just changed his address. Sheriff Keller met me in the hallway of the station, in the same building with the peeling paint and the crooked sign. It was 8 in the morning. I was awake. He was awake, too. "You decided to bring it officially after all," he said. "No problem." "I've decided," I replied and put the envelope with the printouts on the table. Photos, time codes, extracts. A copy of the camera recording that you didn't find. Passports in the photo. Tickets, too. And also a list of Alex's calls over the last 24 hours. From numbers that you won't see in the billings, but it was enough for me. He leafed through the pages in silence. His fingers moved slowly, as if on a wet board. He caught on to the word boat. "Our guys didn't make it," he said, without looking up. "Fog. The Coast Guard came out, but that boat didn't have one of our engines, and the pilot wasn't one of ours either." "Amanda was there," I said. He looked. No questions in his eyes, just polite weariness. "She's your wife," he said. "Did you bring it to her?" "I brought it on him," I replied. "On both of them, if necessary. Do what you must, Sheriff." "And you?" "I'll write a report, and go unpaid. If I'm lucky, just a reprimand." He chuckled. The papers in his hands rustled like dry seaweed. "Alex?" I asked. "He left on the road west. We didn't catch him. But now we have a reason. And procedures." He tapped the envelope. "You're a good boy, Reeves. Or a fool. In such matters, it makes little difference." "I know." I stepped outside. The rain had washed away the last of the fog, and the sky was the color of wet concrete. The lighthouse loomed on the horizon like someone else's finger. In my pocket, my phone was silent. No new messages, not from Amanda, not from the boss. In the motel, I sat down at the table and started writing. Chronology, observations, evidence, conclusions, recommendations. Mechanical work like chewing dry bread. Every detail in its place. Canisters in the barn, V-shaped marks on the parquet, disabled alarm, transfer to the gallery, tickets, passports, correspondence, night meeting above the lighthouse. I attached all the photos to the report, indicating where the original recording was stored, where the copies were. At the end, I put a dry phrase. I recommend initiating an investigation through law enforcement agencies and suspending the payment until the end of the investigative actions. Send it off. Then I stared at the blank screen for a long time, and I realized that I didn't know where to go. To New York, to our kitchen with cups, where the smell of coffee hung in the air like a hanged past, or to the ocean where the boat cut the water like a knife. There was no way in either direction for me. The boss called. "Are you crazy?" he asked without greeting. "How many copies? Who else did you send them to? Do you understand what this will lead to for us?" "I understand," I said, "but it will be cheaper this way." He cursed, long and habitually. Then he gave in. "Okay, I'll cover as much as I can, but you're out of business for a while. Got it? Understood. And one more thing," he added in a different voice. "I sympathize." I switched it off. Sympathy in the receiver sounds like sand. It creaks and presses on the teeth. By evening, the news had crept into the local newspaper. In Montauk, an insurance case has been suspended for a fire at a local businessman's mansion. Sheriff TK has announced the start of an investigation. No names, no details, all correct. The scale is wrong. But these lines were enough for me to understand. The wheel was turning. I drove home, not because I wanted to breathe in the smoke again, because I wanted to see the ashes in daylight. They are always different. The ruins lay quiet. The sun, timidly breaking through the gray, dried the top layer and, conversely, emphasized the black. In the place where the living room had once been, there lay a charred frame. The wood had cracked along the grain, a perfect, clean fracture. I put my fingers to it, and it was cold. Smooth, like a new scar. "Did you find anything else?" a familiar voice asked. Sheriff Keller stood at the gate, hands in his pockets, looking out to sea. "Boat prints in the sand," he said to himself. An hour later, the wave washed it all away. "A lousy thing, this sea of yours, always for those who leave." "Have you been to the lighthouse?" I asked. "I was. I saw the sedan drive away. I saw you standing there, not moving. Don't worry, the report will say you held your own." He looked at me, narrowing his eyes. "That's not always praise, you know." "I know." He was silent. "She's your wife." He repeated what he had said in the morning. "Do you love her?" "Yes," I answered. "And no." "I see," he nodded. "It was the same for me, only without the boats." We stood there for a while longer. A chill blew in from the sea. The cliff breathed. Life went on as best it could. That night, I packed my things. Not because I had to, but because I couldn't live in a room where the walls remembered my lack of sleep. I left the key and an envelope with a short note for Amanda on the motel desk. Stupid, probably. But I wrote 4 lines. "You're free. I made a choice. So do you. Take care of yourself. Jason." And I added the phone number she already knew. A simple gesture to myself, not to hold on, not to drag a shadow along with me. In the car, before leaving, I sat with my eyes closed. In the darkness, images flashed. Her palm on the boat's railing, blue light in the fog, Alex's smile like a cut. I understood that this story was not over. People like Shoal do not dissolve like salt. They leave for a while. They know how. But now it is no longer my job. Or, on the contrary, now it is only mine. On the way to the highway, I slowed down at the lighthouse. The wind was fresher than yesterday. I went down a couple of steps to the fence, looked down. Where the boat had set course last night, the water was flat as a mirror. I threw a coin into it. It went away without bubbles. In New York, I opened the door to our apartment with a key that no longer meant anything. Silence greeted me like a policeman at the threshold. No smile, no aggression. There was a cup on the kitchen table. Hers. I didn't clean it up. I just sat down opposite and stared at its shape, at the chip on the handle. We get used to cracks, sometimes that's all that holds us together. An unfamiliar number called in the morning. "Mr. Reeves," a cold voice with a smile. "We would like to clarify a few points regarding the Montauk case. Are you convenient for a meeting? No, I said. I'm out of business. I understand, the voice smiled wider. Then we'll find a convenient hour ourselves. Good luck, I said and hung up. The insurance world doesn't like a hole in a report. It sews it up sometimes with any thread. The question of price is eternal. Who pays and with what? This time I paid, not with money. With that part of me that believed that the truth decides everything. The next morning a letter arrived. Unsigned, with the address of Reykjavik in the subject and 3 words in the text. Don't be a hero. Live. I didn't answer. I simply deleted it and then deleted it again from the trash. The sheriff sent a short message. Payment suspended. Warrants in progress. Long way ahead. I thanked him. He didn't respond. In such cases, thank you sounds false. I went out into the street. The city stretched like a tight string. People walked, carrying their affairs, their little fires. I caught a taxi, drove to the office, and left my pass on the table. I told the secretary, vacation. She nodded, long prepared for any stupidity of the employees. At home, I took our wedding photo out of the drawer. We were standing on the steps of the city hall, young, stupid, honest. You know what's strange? I didn't feel any anger, just emptiness so smooth that you could clearly hear your heart beating in it. That evening, I went to Montauk again. Not for business, but for ashes. I wanted to pick up a small piece of black wood from the ground and put it on the shelf next to the photograph. A reminder that fire is not a metaphor. It is simple physics, fuel, oxygen, a spark. And everything we call fate is often just that. I stood by the ruins and thought that maybe one day a new house would grow in this place. Or a field, or just grass. We disappear, that's okay. But the things I chose remain, not to take the bag from the trunk, to press send, to step aside so the woman in the sweater could jump on board. These are my decisions, my sins, my truth. The mansion burned down, but with it burned the life in which I expected to be loved for being right. The new version of me doesn't have that point. There's something else. The silence in which ashes rustle under your fingers, the city where every window has its own little fire, and the lighthouse that blinks but doesn't save anyone from anything. It just shows the shore is here. I arrived at the ocean at dusk. I sat down on a rock. I took a black splinter out of my pocket, the one with the clean break. I held it until the wind dried my palms. Then I threw it into the water. The splinter floated parallel to the shore, like a small boat. Live, I said out loud to her, and to myself too. I turned to the road, where the headlights were already turning on, and I went. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.